Florida, officially named the Sunshine State, also known as the Orange State or the Gulf State. But there's one thing Florida should be known for that is more honest and more accurate than any other: the Water State. But that could change. Considering it's a peninsula, it's not surprising that you're never more than 60 miles from the beach when you're in Florida. But in addition to all that coastline, the rivers and springs in Florida are legendary. Not only is this the highest concentration of freshwater springs in the world, the state has an abundance of exciting animals not found most other places.
People come to Florida to enjoy what our water has to provide, whether it's clean beaches, great fishing, great boating, waterfront real estate. Water is really at the heart of Florida's economy.
Because of all these amazing things to do, outdoor recreation is Florida's #1 revenue stream. It brings in over $100 billion annually, and this sustains more than 1 million jobs for locals. Florida receives more than 100 million visitors each year, with a few million of them coming specifically to see the springs. While enjoying the abundant waterways in the state, few people stop to think about where this water comes from and if it will ever run out.
Florida historically was an agricultural state. You think of the winter vegetables, the citrus industry. We're now a tourism-based state, and so people don't come here for our agriculture, and that's not our biggest export. It's tourism. That's our biggest export, and that's tied directly to the health of our environment.
But what may not be evident from the surface are deeper issues showing the health of our springs is at stake. If we don't act soon, these springs will disappear forever. Florida has been inhabited by humans for thousands of years, but in the 1950s, we saw the first spurt of tremendous population growth, and it hasn't slowed since. By 1980, Florida's population had reached nearly 10 million, and by 2020, just 40 years later, that number more than doubled to 21 million. In that relatively short time span, water consumption in the state has gone up over 400%.
This is really a legacy of decision-making and actions over the past century, and we're just realizing the consequences of that in the last decade or two. Our geology in Florida is really transmissive, meaning that water moves almost as freely through the ground as it does across the surface. There's a direct connection between the health of our surface water and the health of our groundwater. We have a water quality problem and we have a water quantity problem.
To truly understand the impact overpumping and pollution can have on our drinking water, it's important to know how the water system works. The entire state sits on a porous limestone layer, and the water moves through it easily like a sponge. Running through this limestone are rivers of water collectively called an aquifer. As surface water percolates down through these layers and into the aquifer, it creates pressure pushing water up through large holes in the limestone to create the Florida Springs. And the aquifer is where 90% of Florida's drinking water comes from, right beneath our feet.
When we pump too much water out of Florida Springs, we're also exacerbating the water quality problems. We're making the algae worse. We're losing more critical habitat for manatees and other wildlife. And we're ruining those springs and their recreational value for local communities.
In the 1960s, the Florida government set up 5 water management districts to avoid major environmental issues through granted water use permits. These permits were intended to regulate who could tap into the water source and how much they could take. Unfortunately, these permits are incredibly easy to acquire and cost as little as $115 per permit. In the Swanee River Water Management District, a water system that is greatly struggling, in the last 40 years, only 6 out of almost 7,000 permits have been denied. And one of those infamous approved permits you may already have heard of was for Nestle Waters North America.
A few years ago, Nestle North America decided that they wanted to expand their bottling operation in Central and North Florida to be able to pump more water and put it into bottles to sell around the country. When they did this, they needed to get a new consumptive use permit. That's a permit that allows you to pull water out of our aquifer and then sell it for whatever use you're going to be, whether it's agriculture to grow food, whether it's domestic supply, so that we have water that comes out of our faucets and showers, or whether you want to pump it out of the ground to put it into a plastic bottle. And the location where they decided to expand was here on the Santa Fe River. And the problem is this river is one of the places in Florida that's already experiencing significant harm, according to our state, because of overpumping. And what Nestle wanted to do was they wanted to triple the water use coming out of Ginnie Springs.
Nestle's intended use of this permit is to pump 984,000 gallons of water per day out of the spring. Let's do some quick calculations. If the average gallon of water costs about $1.70, and Nestle is pumping 984,000 gallons of water per day, that's a daily draw of about $1.6 million worth. If they do this for 365 days, that's an estimated revenue of more than $600 million per year. And they only pay $115 for the permit. And that's not their only water pumping facility in the state. Knowing the river and springs are valuable, in 2020, more than 19,000 people formally stated their thoughts on the Nestle permit. Conservation nonprofit Our Santa Fe River took the time to read a couple thousand of them and said public sentiment was overwhelmingly against the permit.
I don't think there's any chance that the Water Management District read those. I wonder if they read any at all. And whether they read them or not, they certainly did not consider them in any way when making their permitting decision. So they are handing out the water that belongs to us, but not even taking the time to see what our concerns and how we want to protect that water is.
So why, in early 2021, did the Water Management District approve a $115 permit for a company to make billions of dollars by taking public water?
My understanding is that over 99% of water use permits have been improved by the districts over the last 30 or 40 years. And the reason is because they're not taking into account the public interest or the interest of our environment in making those permitting decisions. They're only looking at how the water can benefit private industry and how it can turn a profit, not looking at the big picture of what's best for our state. This water belongs to us. It doesn't belong to corporations. It doesn't belong to developers. It belongs to each and every one of us. And it's our responsibility to make sure that it's protected.
It's clear we can't rely on our government to rule on these permits with our best interests in mind. As the governor appoints the Water Management District members, it's suggested that he includes diverse backgrounds, including environmental interests, but it's not required. There's no requirement that anyone represents Floridians.
Right now, there's kind of a Ponzi scheme when it comes to Florida's environment. On one hand, they're handing out permits to every corporation that comes along and wants to pump water. Then they're using our taxpayer money for projects to make up for the harm that those permits and those water uses are causing.
And that's what we call a vicious cycle. We allow corporations to take the water, reducing water quality and quantity. People then buy the water, causing demand for more as the source is slowly depleted. And the cycle continues. The most tangible, visible evidence of this cycle in action is White Spring. With 47 million gallons of water flowing from this spring every day, it once drew travelers from around the globe. But as activity like phosphate mining increased in the area, so did water consumption, and by 1990, the flow dwindled to just a trickle. When I first visited White Springs, I was absolutely heartbroken. This used to bring in thousands of people from around the world, and now this is decaying, falling apart, and it stinks. This is what happens when we ignore science. This is what happens when we prioritize profit before people. So why in the world are we still allowing our government to do this? The fact that the system allows this to happen with nothing to stop it is disgusting. We reached out to the Swanee River Water Management District for a statement regarding the Nestle permit, and their response emphasized the three-pronged test that they apply to each permit application.
And the most important one of those requirements is that the permit has to be in the public's interest.
The district also confirmed its full confidence in the scientific evaluation used prior to making the permit decisions, which is confusing since they initially rejected Nestle's permit request.
First, the district said you can't have the permit. And Nestle sued them and took them to court and eventually won. And the Water Management District granted Nestle a permit to pump 1 million gallons a day out of Ginnie Springs, which directly impacts the Santa Fe River. And knowing that this permit was harmful to our environment, knowing that this permit was not in the best interests of the people of Florida, and knowing that it would give very, very little back to our local communities, the Florida Springs Council and our member groups decided we needed to challenge this permit to say enough was enough, because this water belongs to us, not the multinational corporations.
So, they sued the Swanee River Water Management District over the Nestle permit. It's been a 3-year court battle so far, and while the permit still stands, the Florida Springs Council hopes to reverse that. Our government has been allowing our natural resources, specifically our water, to be exploited for long enough. This lawsuit by the Florida Springs Council may turn things around, and we're all hoping it does exactly that. But what happens if they lose the court case?
The worst case scenario is that we continue to allow corporations to come in and exploit Florida's water resources, leading to great environmental damage. And it's very difficult to kill a spring, but it really is possible. And we have a dead spring in White Springs that will probably never come back to life because of what we as people have done to the water resources in that area. You can look at Peacock Spring right now, which is suffering from the flow being reversed due to over pumping and excessive nitrogen. Peacock's in terrible shape right now. And if we don't fix the water use permitting system, we'll see more and more springs begin to die or fail the way that those springs are.
I think that we need more political will. We need more resources focused. I think we're seeing movement in that direction, but I think we need much more attention, and it's not just the attention of elected officials. I think people in general need to realize their contributions to these problems.
What's happening here on the Santa Fe River, giving out water to multinational corporations while the local communities and our natural environment suffers, is the same story that's being played out in communities across America and really across the world. We're no longer in a position where we can fail to value our ecological resources. We've now exploited them to the point that it's not just enough to slow down their destruction, but we have to be actively trying to preserve and restore them. And right here in Florida Springs is a great place to start.
The water belongs to us, to Floridians. It's our life source and sustains our economy. But we've been acting like it's an infinite resource, but it's not. We've been trusting our government to protect the water for us, but they failed catastrophically. But it's not too late to change that. It's not too late to use our voices and our votes to make important changes. It's not too late to save our Florida Springs.